This is Creepy and Geeky, a part of the Morbidly Beautiful Podcast Network. Welcome to Creepy and Geeky. I'm your host, Robert, and on today's episode is part 3 in my series on the Saw franchise. Joining me today for this look at Saw 5 and 6 is returning guest Cat Voleur. Cat is the co-host of Slasher Radio and the Nick Effin Woo Cage Cast. She's also a writer whose debut book, Revenge Arc, is available now and is an awesome read, so go get it. Welcome back to the show, Cat.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me for Saw. I've been waiting for this one to be covered.
Well, I had to do it. It was originally this series was timed to coincide with the new movie, so that the last episode would come out like the Monday right after the new episode came out, or the new movie came out. But now, because the movie's coming earlier, a month earlier, now it's just gonna, like, this whole series is gonna come out afterward. So but I'm glad to have you on for that. I know the Saw franchise is one of your favorites, so
it is. It is actually, it's my favorite
okay.
full franchise. This one's my favorite.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, definitely we'll get into some of that for sure. We're talking Saw 5 and 6. This is kind of deep in the middle of it all. This is continuing the story of Detective Hoffman, really, as the new Jigsaw killer after John Kramer died in number 3. So it's just continuing on with his story, and we're getting more backstory of John Kramer and how Hoffman got connected to him and everything else. So so Saw 5 was this is the one with trying to remember now. Saw 5 is the one with the group of people who are put in the trap. Yes.
Saw 5 is one of the big group traps. It's something that's kind of interesting because the story of John Kramer is so continuous throughout the movies that when you and I feel like all horror movies have this, where it's like they have one kind of recurring identifying feature in them. With it, like in Final Destination is a really easy one because it's like the big accident at the beginning is kind of how you differentiate which one it is. For me in Saw, it's the group traps. Like I can tell them apart by like which group is stuck in the main trap.
Right. Yeah, no, I like the group traps. Those are my favorites, like number 2 and number 5, and Jigsaw. Those are the ones that the when it's a group of people who should be working together but who inevitably don't, because they're so like suspicious of each other, and they're all just so on edge that they all end up dying one by one, just like a slasher. So
Saw 5 really is the epitome of that.
Right. Yeah, it really is, because they really should be working together, and they figure it out at the very end. Oh, we should have been working together this whole time, but
we were all supposed to survive.
Yeah, and it's the only time they it's really kind of said out loud, by anybody, is that, oh, if we'd done the right thing, we would have all made it through this easier. But without that, then but yeah, because number 2, nobody really articulates that,
except for funnily enough, John Kramer, he tells them like right at the beginning of Saw 2, he's like, listen, work together, and they're like, no. Hard pass, and they all die.
Well, he always tells everybody that, like, he always tells them to go against your nature, don't do the thing that you think you need to do, and every time they do that, and it
They
always
always do
kicks them
it.
in the ass. It's so funny to watch because you're just like, yeah, they're not gonna do it, dude. You know it. And that's even what he says. I think it's in number 6 that he says, he knows human nature, and just that, he knows that no matter what, even if they make the right decision at one point, it's that they're still going to end up failing. So,
Yeah.
he has set these traps in such a way that it's almost impossible that somebody will live through them. And because he knows by their very nature, by the people who are in these traps, that there's no way they're going to choose to do the right thing and get out of it. So it's kind of pointless. But he's always surprised when somebody does, like Amanda got out of it, and did what she needed to do to get out of it in time. So you know uh
And
it's
it makes us really appreciate Amanda. It makes us really this is 5 and 6 are actually I really like these two. I have a soft spot for these like middle Saw movies. Um
right.
but especially because we moved from John Kramer as a person is very against corruption, which I think is very funny because his successor is Mark Hoffman. But
Yeah.
like systematically he goes against, and this is where we see him kind of branch out from his like cops and justice system into, like other institutions that have
Right.
corruption, which I think was a really interesting move for the franchise. I think it was very interesting for John's character. I, but they're a little bit shaky just because this was after they thought the Saw franchise was going to be gone. There were some road bumps letting Hoffman take over because Hoffman
Yeah.
is also very corrupt. He has his own problems.
Yeah.
But I do have kind of like an appreciation for 5 and 6 specifically, where it's like where we're going to tackle, the politicians to an extent, and like the news coverage and that side of the penal system, which we don't see very much in
Right.
the earlier movies. And then like even in 6, that's expanded upon further, where he starts taking on like the corruption of health insurance, which
Right.
is just like which it makes sense, because he goes after Dr. Gordon in the first one. Like I feel like it's a natural progression of something we had already seen he was interested in as early as the first movie. But um
Yeah.
that being said, 5 is uh just in terms of like jigsaw traps. I do think this one's really interesting because we get all of John Kramer's usual, like, you have to not follow your instincts, you've got to work
Right.
together, kind of. And this is just such a blatant disregard for that because especially with the one actual reporter, uh that they're not going to do it. Like
Right.
and this
Yeah.
was one too where they actually have a character say out loud, "I'm not doing."
Yeah. No, it's so funny too, because I mean, it goes back to what I was saying. Like, he knows that people are going to fail. Like, he knows that no matter what he says to them and gives them all the clues, he gives, like, that's the funny thing, is when you get to the end of these movies, it's laid out before you. All the stuff that he said not to do or to do, that he was blatant about, but they all went the opposite way on. They should have
Yeah.
been paying attention and slowed down, think about things. Now, I get it. You're in a high stress situation. You got like 60 seconds to figure things out. That's going to make it tough, you know? And I mean, but
Yeah.
that's what he's doing, that on purpose, because he doesn't really want them to get it figured out and get them to keep calm and to, take the time to, think about that stuff. So, in the end, he really wants all these people dead, so
And then you have to wonder about it too, because this is one of the traps that John had set up in his like studio for he had set up like the scale recreation,
right.
and he had like the instructions for Mark to follow through on. And you have to wonder, I think about this a lot, more than is healthy. I spend time thinking about what would have happened if we hadn't lost John in the third movie. Um, because
Yeah.
I think this could have been drastically different if Britt, Julie Benz's character, had made it to the end of this and John Kramer had been the one to like let her out of the trap, I think we could have had like another Amanda moment or another reverse Amanda moment, even where like she could have not taken the help, she could have sought justice, or whatever.
Right.
We could have had an arc with her because John, I think, would have tried to recruit her, whereas Mark Hoffman is like, okay, you made it to the end, like let the police get called or whatever. He's dealing
Right.
with his own shit. And that's the thing about Mark is he's always got his own stuff going on because he's always like his solution to everything is just to start shooting people and blaming
Or
other
stabbing them.
cops.
Yeah. Oh my
It's
God.
like so the end of this movie kind of devolves, and it's one of the like missed opportunities I think because we did lose John so soon.
Yeah.
Um, we have to follow this Mark storyline throughout five instead of seeing like what John's intentions would have been because someone did make it, and even as late as the last trap, you know, it's one of those things where it's like they all could have very easily made it if they'd given enough blood amongst
Yeah.
five people, but there's a chance that they can survive with just the two. So it's like you're still giving them that sliver of hope, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like I would have loved to see like what John's culmination in that was, but he really doesn't leave instructions for the survivors
Right.
that Mark like that makes it through Mark's traps. So it's like and we actually see it's not the implication is that Julie Benz lives, even though she got recast. Like they couldn't get Julie
Yeah.
Benz back. But there is the like dark-haired woman with the one
Yeah.
arm wrapped back up at
In
in
number
the
seven.
survivors group in seven, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I would have loved to see that story. Like Mark
Yeah. It's
gets in his own way.
well, because Mark is coming from a different place. Like, I think,
Yeah.
like, Kramer comes from, Kramer's definitely coming from a stance of vengeance and justice. He's trying to right the wrongs by taking these corrupt people out. But Mark is just killing people.
Mark's just like,
Because
fucking getting blackmailed in this
yeah,
where he's just like I've got to kill these people real quick so I can get the fuck out of this
yeah.
game. Like
Well, and that's ultimately the other thing too. Like Kramer was like a nobody. Nobody knew who he was really.
yeah,
And so he was able to do that from the shadows, whereas Hoffman, he's a cop. It makes
yeah.
things a lot more difficult to get around some of that stuff. But although at the same time, being a cop, he should have known better how to hide his tracks. Like he knows what cops are going to look for. So like that's that's a failing on his part because he gets wrapped up in all of this. Like that's who he should have been in this whole um like network
Yeah.
of Kramer acolytes, because eventually we find out there's not only Amanda but Hoffman. We find out what is it in Jigsaw, he's got
Logan.
another one, Logan, and then also Gordon's out there, in
Yeah.
number seven. So it's like there's so many acolytes that are part of this whole thing, and like and they each kind of serve different roles and purposes. And Hoffman was kind of recruited to be like weirdly like his right hand man for some weird reason, but he obviously still wasn't telling him everything. He didn't tell him about Gordon, and
Yeah.
we don't find out about that until the next movie. But he obviously didn't trust Hoffman
No.
enough. He trusted him to a certain extent, but even then, he still didn't trust him enough because he still left instructions with Jill.
It
And, and so there's all this going on that just shows that Hoffman was not the guy who was supposed to take over everything.
he was not the guy. It's something that I do think is really interesting though, and one of the reasons why I'm always like grateful that there were uh, well there are as many Saw movies as there are, I guess. Uh we're still getting them.
Yeah.
X isn't out yet. But I do think it's really interesting because there's uh so many like double whammies in this franchise. Losing Kramer and Amanda in the same movie,
Yeah,
you kind of have to, you're so shocked. And then, 4, we kind of go back and we get the explanation as to like how Hoffman kind of enters into this. We get the big
right.
jaw-dropping moment and stuff. 5, comes in and tells us a little bit about how he got involved, but I don't really think it's until like 6 and 7 that you understand like because there was also someone checking because like when 5 came out in the theater, I was like, why is this the guy that John trusted more than Amanda to keep things
Yeah,
going? Like, even if you have to test everyone, I feel like Hoffman should have been tested first because I would sooner trust Amanda than Mark still.
well,
Like
and that's what's bizarre is like, why was Hoffman never tested? Like, why was like, he should have been fully tested like in the beginning,
in the beginning.
before anything happened. So
But then like after you see because that's where I was at when 5 came out. But then like after 6 it's like if you already have all of these big plans like laid out this specifically, like we've seen that Mark is bad at doing his own plans or doing any kind of cover it
yeah,
up. He's bad at thinking on his feet. He's not got the right motives for all of this stuff. But if you already have plans for like these big things laid out that are that important to you, like the fire, like the arson case in 5 and the health insurance thing in 6, then it's like you really at that point want someone who is just going to straight up follow your instructions and is going to be able to
right.
get it done. And like in retrospect, it makes more sense to me why John kept Mark around as long as he did. um
Well, and
because
it
I
feels.
remember coming
Go
out of
ahead.
the theater of 5 not understanding like what the logic was here. But that's the beautiful thing about the series is that like it will tie up like questions that you have from like several
Yeah,
installations back.
yeah, because they're finally filling in that plot hole. So they're just like,
Yeah.
okay, well, we need to fix that. People have been bitching about that for a couple of years, so let's go back and fill in that hole. So yeah, no, I feel like what ended up happening most and like with Hoffman is that he was using Hoffman as, he needed somebody who was strong, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, he needed somebody that could be his fall guy,
Yeah.
that could carry on long enough, but then who he could throw under the bus later. And I think that was his whole intention with Hoffman. And I think
I
that's
think so.
honestly kind of why he didn't test him either. So that, because one, he knew Hoffman probably wouldn't survive a test. So,
Yeah.
um, and he needed him around to do the work for him. So, I mean, when it comes down to it, Hoffman was more of a patsy than anything else that, would go down when he needed him to go down. And that's why when, at the end of number 6, I know we're jumping way ahead, but at the end of number 6, Jill, come puts him in the reverse bear trap and, almost takes him out.
Almost.
So, and I think the frustrating thing for me is that especially through 5 and 6 here, we're getting a lot with Jill Tuck and a lot of her connection and seeing that, she has been a part of this the whole time. That
Yeah.
she, again, another person connected to Kramer, another person that nobody knew was involved. And I feel like she could have been like the ultimate partner to him, but they kind of like left that on the floor a little too much. And it feels
Yeah.
like there's that potential there in these two movies, but they never fully realize it. And I feel like she could have been so badass as like the ultimate heir to everything.
She could have been. And
Yeah.
I would have liked to see it's rough because that's something that I would have really liked to see.
Yeah.
But 7, I'm jumping ahead to stuff we're not even talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
7 was like kind of undoes some of that because I
It
think the
very
direction
much undoes it all.
that they took it in would have been really interesting if instead of Jigsaw we had gotten Saw 8 that continued the loose ends from 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
not even the loose ends, just like the fucking cliffhanger. Like
Yeah.
they gave us questions in 7, and then Jigsaw comes in and was like, "Well, let's introduce Logan." And
Yeah.
we're like, "What?" Um I was interested enough though in the questions that 7 asked that I was
Yeah.
willing to not let Jill be. But I do agree with you, like in these middle installations specifically, because Jill has the potential to be a mastermind kind of behind
Yeah.
this, especially in 6. Like she's so cool in
Yes.
6. Um
Yeah, that's what's frustrating is just like they build her up and they make her so cool and everything, and then 7 undoes every potential for her.
yeah.
And it feels so rushed and everything. And I know that I've already, talking about that and then another thing, but I just feel like with, because they built her up so well in these two, in 5 and
Yeah.
6, that, and especially in 6, that, it just feels like such a, like, again, if they, they messed up in killing Kramer in number 3,
They did.
and killing Amanda, and they messed up by ruining the potential for, like, it's, that's what's frustrating is I do like these movies, and I think
Mhm.
their overall consistency and continuity is really good, but there's so much potential in these movies that gets squandered.
There's a
um
lot of lost potential in these movies. And the
yeah.
thing, it's that's usually my biggest pet peeve in horror movies. That
Hmm.
drives me crazy so much of the time. The reason why and I'm not going to say it doesn't bother me in Saw, because it does. I think about this all the time about how much better these movies could have been. But I'm also, it's like on the one hand, it's very frustrating. On the other hand, I'm so impressed by like how well they covered their tracks with this,
No,
because it's like,
yeah.
like Saw, no one knew with the first Saw movie how big this was going to be. Like this
Right.
was a shoestring like kind of like let's fuck around and do this kind of a project, and
Yeah.
it got outrageously big. And then like even with 3, it's like I can kind of understand them thinking that was going to be the last one, wanting to go out
Right.
with a bang and stuff. And then like when you see how many times I can't think of any other franchise that's just been passed around to so many writers and directors and stuff that has honored the original story to such a
Kept it
degree,
consistent. Yeah.
and especially with like, and 5 and 6 is where it's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about that. It's one of my favorite aspects of the franchise, and I think 5 and 6 really cement it, because 4, it's like, well, okay, you have to go back and you have to tell uh John Kramer's story in the passing of the torch a little bit, because we're figuring out who the next Jigsaw is going to be. So they kind of have this like um passing of the torch arc in 4, but then 5 and 6 make the decision where it's like, we're going to keep John involved, we're going to continue to have the flashbacks, we're going to tell the
Yeah.
story of how he gets like deeper involved with Hoffman, and then it's like, okay, well, is that, just the second half of 4 where we pass the torch off and now we have Hoffman, and then 6 came in and it's like, no, this is still about Kramer, this is still John's story. Like, we're doing this. And it's like, I know it's the point where a lot of fans like tapped out because they're like, this dude's dead, why are we still doing this? But it was like what really sealed the franchise for me, because it's like, we're committing to this and I appreciate it. Like,
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that the fact that they have, I think that falls to the producers. I think, keeping the
yeah,
consistency strong like that, what they do is they get people who are going to hold to what they want them to do, rather than, creating a wholesale story on their own. And I know that, some of the writers have had their own stories that they then modified into the Saw structure. Um,
yeah.
and that's cool. Like, I like that they do that, because then it's like you keep the narrative consistent. And yes, each movie has to then go back and fill in a hole, and each movie has to continue to fill in those holes as it goes along, but that's fine. It's at least in that way, it's keeping that storyline consistent with each other, keeping the feeling of it. And I think that that's important. And especially when you're talking about these long running horror franchise, you look at something else that like Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Friday the 13th, they're horrible. They're all over the place. Because the producers aren't trying to keep any narrative consistency on them. They're just
Yeah.
like, oh well, whatever. Chucky is one that does
Let's
keep
try
it
this out.
together as best as possible because Don Mancini's been there the whole time.
Yeah.
So so that part works really well. And I do like that. But it is frustrating again how um just how much potential's lost through these. Yes, I love the consistency, I love the everything that they've done for it, but it's like, but so much has been lost,
So
and so many
much.
cool interesting things.
But
So
I do
eh,
love, like, especially living in the present timeline where we've seen
yeah.
Jigsaw and where we've seen Spiral, which are my two least favorite of the franchise. But it's because they didn't follow that formula. They're like,
Right.
let's take this in a new direction in Jigsaw, even though the new direction kind of relied on tropes that we had seen in the
Well, I was
franchise
gonna say, I
already.
feel like Jigsaw itself, when you look back on it, like because I just watched all of these, and Jigsaw was the only one I hadn't seen. So when
Yeah.
watching that, in comparison to all the others, it feels pretty close to a Saw movie.
Oh, see, I
It's
don't feel that way.
really interesting.
I
Why don't
feel
you?
like they've recycled some elements
Yeah,
from the Saw franchise in Jigsaw that kind of trick you into feeling like it's a Saw movie, but it feels very like action oriented. It feels more procedural. It definitely doesn't strike the same visual cues as the early Saw movies. And I feel like a lot of the things that feel the most Saw heavy from that franchise, like the twist at the end is kind of like the recycled twist from
right.
4, where it's like, we tricked you, it's two timelines, and we're like, oh, all right, I guess. It was cleaner than it was in 4, I'll
Yeah,
admit, but it was like,
yeah.
but it was the same kind of like, I feel like a lot of the structure that was borrowed from Saw was nothing like new enough to really
Well, and
uh
I think
fold
that
onto
was
some
kind of the
legs.
point for it. Like having watched it, like as myself, as a person who hasn't like devoted themselves to this and like has only watched each of these probably like only twice. That when watching that, it felt new enough, but also at the same time like it was at least trying to stay consistent. Because then rewatching Spiral, for me, that felt completely off, and that was like, and of course, it was meant to be. It was meant to be something that was completely separate from um the main franchise. It was supposed to be an offshoot of it, like
Yeah.
inspired by it, but not exactly it. And at least with Jigsaw, and I know I shouldn't even be talking about these because I'm talking about them in the next episode, but I mean, you again, like I go into it in some of the other episodes, you kind of have a hard time talking about any of these without talking about all of them, um,
Yeah,
because
it's
they are
tough.
so tied together, and their timeline is so twisty and weird that you have to tie it all together. Um,
I do think that like 5 and 6 easily it's easy to be like we could have gotten more good Saw movies if we'd had John Kramer longer, which I believe is true. But it's also easy to be like if the earlier writers and directors and especially the producer team for this franchise hadn't cared as much, we also could have gotten less John Kramer, like, and I think 5 and 6 would have been the turning point for that because once Hoffman takes over after 4 and Darren Lynn Bousman like handed the franchise over, I think it would have been really easy for this to have for like 5 to have been the new Jigsaw, and then
yeah,
where it's like we've gone back and then we introduce like our new guy in 5 and then he kind of takes the franchise in a different direction where it's like a new killer and we could have watched him stumble his way through several more movies that would have declined in quality. But I like that through line is just so strong. watching the franchise kind of like on the shakier footing that it's gotten to be on with the last few installations, I think I, I'm really grateful that we had 5 and 6 the way that they were. Um just because like I it feels like 6 I think is the last one that feels fully like a Saw movie to me. And I say this as someone who loves 7. Like I will die on the hill that Saw 7 is just it's a great movie. It's horrible, but it's great and I love it. Um but 6 is the last one that feels like Saw to me. Like um and it's
Yeah.
because we have Kramer, we have the through line, we have
Right.
a big we have kind of like we have it divvied up into like group traps and then like one person navigating through other people's traps. Uh
Yeah.
but in that sense, we do still have, the one group trap. We have William who's navigating through everybody. We have the great opening scene. We have a great twist end. Six is everything that I want out of a Saw movie. And William actually is. I talk about 3 a lot because 3 is actually like my favorite. It's got my favorite twist and my favorite group trap. But 6 has my favorite like group trap protagonist. Like William fucking kills it. He learns his lesson. He uh, repents. He he comes out of the traps a better person than he enters, you know? He has the like the full Amanda arc in a very short focused amount of time. And with the exception of the lawyer, with the exception of Debbie, I think her name is, he saves everyone that can possibly be saved in that
Yeah.
trap. Like he doesn't miss a fucking thing, even though he has to take like all of these physical punishments to save people along the way. William, winner of the Saw franchise, like he's just uh I was just having this conversation with someone on Twitter the other day because we got into the defense of Saw 7 thing, and it's like Saw 7 I think is a lot of fun, but it's hard to watch Bobby as a character after you've just seen William as a character because
Yeah.
Bobby is the exact opposite of that. Like, and William just fucking like 100% score across the board. It sucks that he doesn't make it. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's like I love him.
I think it's interesting how number 5 and number 6 both kind of parallel 2 and 3 as well. Because
Yes.
2 is a group trap, 5 is a group trap. And they both kind of in the same, nobody really makes it out.
Yeah.
Except for like one person. And then 6 is or 3 is about Jeff getting through and trying to save these people. It's different motivations. Obviously, he's given the choice to try to save these people who he wants revenge on, and so he lets you know 2 of them eventually die. And well, the third also dies, but not through a trap. But so I think it's interesting how they do that. Jeff ultimately fails, whereas
Yeah.
William doesn't. So it's kind of interesting to watch these in comparison to those, because 5 and 6, while sort of being like not retread, I would say, but reminiscent of those 2 movies and doing them in different ways,
Yeah.
to kind of give new interpretations on those other movies. um and like
Eh,
and that's the thing, I didn't even realize it until I was talking about it now, that how similar they were to those. So as a moviegoer, I wouldn't have been like disappointed in the fact that these were you essentially kind of retread, um at least thematically, not necessarily in everything else.
and like the Jeff and William comparison is really interesting too, I think, because it's such they're both very like Jeff, we have that kind of catharsis, it's a revenge story
Right.
essentially, where he's going through the uh motions with the redemption thing, where it's like he
Yeah.
kind of forgives the judge. He kind of forgets the driver at the end, even though he's
Yeah,
not
but
able to
it's
save
way too
him,
late. Yeah.
and then there's like
Doesn't
the
forgive
the
him, or he doesn't forgive him quick enough.
the
So,
pure anger at the end, and we're kind of used to seeing that revenge element brought into the Saw movies. With
yeah.
William, it's so rough because like finding out it's because we follow him, and we follow stories in the Saw franchise of people who have failed their tests, but we've
Right.
never like seen someone. The only other person that we've seen like fully redeemed was Amanda, who
Yeah.
ultimately failed her test, but she went with Jigsaw like for a long time. She was part of the operation, and
Right.
she got into the program and stuff. And like William, to be that intimately focused on someone who learns his lesson and then realize it's not even his test, like that, just
Yeah.
the heart wrenching, like,
Yeah.
because you expect, especially because we've been like conditioned by Saw 3, where we see someone navigate a
Yeah.
big group trap, to think that he's going to have one final test and he's just so primed to pass it, and then it's not his, which,
Yeah.
and then like retroactively or on rewatches, if you're someone that rewatches these movies every year, um it's harder going into 6 because you know how it ends, and but you watch him make these decisions for other people, knowing that that decision is ultimately going to be made for him. I think it makes 6 probably one of the most rewatchable Saw movies for
Mm,
me.
yeah.
Um, because it just like it's a different vibe once you know the twist.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because then you're watching it going, okay, you're gonna get through all this, but you're not gonna get through it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Like make good decisions for these people because the person making your decision isn't going to do as good a job.
Well, and I think that's what makes it interesting too, because he's got to make this decision to save who he can. Um,
Yeah.
and and he does his best, and especially given all the circumstances. So it's like, it's like with the merry-go-round, that
Yeah.
was such a hellacious thing. You can only save two, and it's like you want to be able to save everybody, but I feel like he knew immediately which two he was going to save.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter what anybody said. He just had to, wait and unfortunately watch all the others die. And that's hard. I mean, you
It
you
was hard.
you would want to try to save everybody if possible, but it's not going to happen. So,
And I think
but
a really interesting that the carousel, I think, is one of the most like you don't think of these movies all the time as being emotional.
yeah,
I think a lot of people that haven't seen the whole franchise pretty much think of these as torture porn. Like,
yeah, yeah,
Um, but the carousel is one of the most like poignant character moments in a Saw movie for
yeah,
me. Especially because like you see him struggling with it. You see how much like it hurts him to save the first person, and like how bad he feels for the like people after he uses his second shot to save someone, like how bad he
yeah,
feels for everyone. And then there's the, like, you look at me while you're killing me, and he does. And I think that's where we start to see like William has learned, like he's a better man now. Like,
yeah,
um because we saw how much like trouble he had even looking John in the eyes, like in the flashbacks, and
yeah.
that's what got him here. And now, um he's facing up to stuff, and I really appreciate some of the like deeper storytelling of 6.
Yeah. No, and I think that's ultimately where it comes down to it being interesting. The franchise, by and large, is that yes, ultimately, it comes down to John. If John wants you dead, you're going to be dead. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter your choices, because he knows that you're going to make the wrong choice.
Yeah,
And but it's interesting to watch them try. Um,
it is.
and to see, because it does make it very like, I wouldn't say poignant, but definitely, it you watch the struggle, and you because as a viewer though too, you're like, well, what would I do in this situation,
Right.
and you would I survive? I don't think I would. I think I'd fail and die really quick, honestly. Like, like hopefully I haven't done anything to be put in a saw trap, but who knows, but because sometimes some of these people are put in these traps, like again, some of these people are put in their traps because they just happen to be associated with the really bad guy. um
Right.
and so guilt by association. Or you happen to be like, the loved one of somebody or something, so it's like you're not even actually guilty of something, you're just the bait. And then you're going to still die because they can't save you in time or whatever.
Which was
But
always
yeah.
kind of a factor of the
Yeah.
when I say that this is like the last one that feels like a real Saw movie, I that was always kind of a factor, but I feel like they were
Yeah.
always kind of like kinder to the people that were just like casualties of war
Yeah.
in the franchise up until I I feel like they pushed that line too far in 7. Like, Bobby's wife is a fucking angel, and she gets the
Yeah.
worst trap of everyone. It's
Yeah.
like, um, I don't know about this, but like, even the people that had, even the deaths, that were in this one, they all worked for the evil company. They were
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
a
They were
little
all
bit
part of it.
complicit,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all of the
Absolutely.
deaths that weren't in the hands of the people were like very quick, and like when we look at Dr. Gordon's wife and daughter, like that was going to be a gunshot that was going to be relatively very quick in comparison to some of these
Yeah.
other things. So it's like that was always an element of uh, the Saw movies was the casualties, but they
Yeah.
were always so much more merciful up through 6, in my opinion,
Right.
as opposed to 7 got a little bit crazy in some regards. Um, but
um
6, it feels like they were plotting that stuff out still.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think that I like both of these. I don't know. Let me look at my rating because that's what I like to do now. Is always look at my rating with all of these and try to figure out just where they rank. So
I
I've
think
got
it's also worth mentioning. I like
yeah.
the characters in 5 also. I kind of skimmed past that because William's like one
Yeah.
of my all-time favorite characters. But 5 also, like Britt, I think is really good. Malik is good. It's nice when in a group cast there are still some like winners in there, there are
Right.
people that stand out.
So I don't have like so my ranking on these. I'll caveat these by saying I don't hate any of these movies.
Okay.
Like I even like Jigsaw and Spiral. Because I like that they're somewhat different.
Yeah.
Especially after you've watched 1 through 7, and they all feel, while they push the story forward and they're all interesting in their own ways, they all feel kind of samey after a while. And at least with Jigsaw and Spiral, they kind of broke out and did some things differently, that I personally found interesting. So so I've got Saw 5 at number 6 on my list, and Saw 6 at number 8. And that's out of 10, obviously. So I mean they're in the second half of my stuff, but um I they're still really strong. So um,
They
but
are, I had to pull up my list real quick to actually see what numbers they are. They're 4 and 5 for me, with 6 being
okay.
4,
Okay.
and 5 being the fifth. That being said, they're actually, I think, the two closest for me, like in terms of quality.
Right. Which is
uh,
interesting because I mean, they have the same writers, but they have different directors.
they do.
Because
And
David
which
Hackle was number 5, and um, number 6 was Kevin Grutter, who's been the editor on all of these as well, like all the previous entries. Um,
which is
he's the
really
one.
funny because like with the directors in this franchise, that like doesn't always mean a lot, because I feel like two of the biggest
No.
quality differences for me are in between like 3 and 4 are not even next to each other on my ranking. Uh, and they have the same director. And then like even
Yeah,
though Jigsaw and Spiral are close to like they're next to each other on the list, but I feel like there's a pretty big drop. I said that Jigsaw doesn't really feel like a Saw movie to me, which is true. I don't feel that way, but I actually like a lot of the things that Jigsaw did. Like
right.
um so yeah, but there's a pretty like big quality decline in even in some directors. So it's like that 5 and 6 are so close. Like I don't want to call them interchangeable because I like them for different reasons,
Right.
but
Yeah.
like they're so close. Like at 6 I only like just a little bit better, I think. Um and it really is. It's like right there. And I think one of the things is because I don't know if this is like an aging thing. I don't know if I'm just becoming like a really cynical person as I grow older. 'Cause I was, oh God, I was young when Saw came out. I used to go every year to watch the new one like for my birthday in theater. And when that started young. It explains a lot about my childhood, I think. But I literally grew up with these movies. I was like 11 or 12, I think, when I started going to these. And
Wow.
I like these just meant so much to me as a kid. I grew up with
Yeah.
this franchise, and I remember just being like, because they were so, it wasn't that they were scary, but like they had that moral component where I would think about them like pretty much until the next year when the next one came out. Like they were on my mind a lot. It made it very effective horror for me
Right.
because, you know, there were just, it wasn't like what you were seeing on screen. It was just like the implications of everything. And that really got under my
Yeah.
skin. That's still something that kind of gets under my skin with horror movies. It's why I like crazy foreign horror films now, I think. Uh but like the one thing about it going back is because a lot of the stuff, like a lot of the moral dilemmas, even though I could get it, you know, where it's like, oh, this is a bad cop and now he has to take a test, or like, oh,
Right.
they killed John Kramer because they denied him treatment and now they have to do a test. Like as a kid, some of that stuff went over my head. I remember the like doubling down of appreciation for this franchise that I had when like as an adult I was rewatching 6, and it's like I'm kind of a little bit on John's side. Like I'm not going to go so far as to say he was justified, but like as someone that now pays for my own insurance and has had to
Yeah.
do like all of these dumb medical tests and has been denied like treatments and medications and, you know, appointments for stuff, it's like the anger is real. Like
Right.
this that was kind of a turning moment in my life where it's like where you start to understand John Kramer, and it's like that might be where you're a little bit too cynical. And then like after that too, because that was like a big like turning point for me where it's like, you know, if he was right about 6, and then you start to like go back, and there are a couple moments in this franchise. 6 was the one that like really sparked it for me. But there are a couple other moments, like when you learn that Eric Matthews was framing people
Yeah.
to get his convictions into, and when the one that I think hits most people the hardest and would have hit me the hardest if I had been paying better attention, I think as a kid, Ivan's death in Saw 4, uh, where it's like because that's the one that like it gets Rig angry enough that he wants Ivan dead also. And I think that's one of the ones. But there are moments in this where it's like, I think the fact that you not necessarily relate to John Kramer, but where you understand where he's coming from, I think
Yeah.
give this series kind of some longevity that it might not otherwise have had.
Well, yeah, because I think that, when we look at the history of slashers, and John Kramer can somewhat be put into that category. That, most slashers have very, if they have any motivation beyond killing, they have very shaky motivations. Thinking about
Yeah.
the Scream killers, any Scream, any Ghostface just had the shittiest motivations ever. They're always the worst.
Yeah.
And so when you look at Kramer, you can sit there and go, you know what? I understand where he's coming from, and I kind of understand what he's going for here. I don't agree with his methodology at all,
Right.
but I can understand his anger, his frustration, and his desire to make some kind of positive change in a person. Um, Even if it is by, torture. So, it's like that's definitely not the method you want to go for, but yeah,
No.
I can understand it. So yeah, and his again, his reasonings, some of his reasonings aren't always the greatest either, but you can understand overall what he's going for in that sense of justice and
Yeah.
um and not revenge, um necessarily, just he's kind of karmic retribution for these people. So
It's just it's interesting.
yeah,
He's always been one of my favorite like villains in a horror movie because
yeah,
and I think it's why it meant so much to me in these middle movies, that he does stay so much in the front and center
yeah,
because he really is kind of the heart of this. Like if we had moved to Hoffman, it would have been a guy just killing
yeah,
for revenge or for fun or whatever the hell is going on or for blackmail, I guess is the case is with
right.
Hoffman. But it's
Well,
like
and I think
that would have
that's
been like another traditional slasher thing and it wouldn't
yeah,
have meant as much.
yeah, and I think that's ultimately what they're going for in these two, which makes it more interesting, is that we could have just written it off and said, okay, well, Kramer's dead. We're going to move on. We're not going to worry about his story anymore, or maybe we'll touch on it lightly or whatever, and we're just going to move on to the next protege. They could
Yeah.
have easily done that. Other series have done that, um, but instead they kept him front and center, because they realized, whoops, we kind of killed the guy who was like the whole motivating factor behind all this. We'd like to tell more of his story, and I think that ultimately, when people go to these movies, I think that's what most people are going for. They want to know more about John Kramer. They're not
Yeah.
like, as much as they're there for the traps, and don't get me wrong, everybody's there for the traps. Come on, but you're also there for the overall story more than anything. And like, at least for me, when watching all these, like, as much as I do appreciate Spiral, the fact that John Kramer wasn't a part of it was kind of like, okay, that's kind of not, like, it's not as interesting. It was still
Yeah.
interesting to me in some ways, but at least with Jigsaw, they found a way to bring him back into it. And at least with these movies, by having him be an integral part of it, it means a lot more, to the overall franchise. And I think most fans of the franchise would agree that that's the reason they keep coming back for it, is mostly for John. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
I think it's good that I don't think it's good that we lost him so early. I've been very vocal about that. If John Kramer has lived longer, this would have been a better franchise. But
I think
uh
so too. Yeah,
again, just like in these middle installations and starting as early as 4 and then moving in through 5 and 6, I think there is a certain respect that I have for John at that point because it's like he tests everyone. He's like constantly putting random lives on the line, and when he tests Amanda, he's willing to put like his own life on the line also. Uh and I think in retrospect, in the movies after we've lost him, it's one of those things where it's like he believed this so much,
yeah,
he was willing to put himself through this the same that he would anybody else, and it's
yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. In the first three, he's central to all of
yeah,
these.
Oh
He's in
yeah.
the middle of the floor in number one. In number two, he's
He's willing
taunting
to get the
Matthews. He knows he's going to get beat the
yeah.
hell down by him to get this to work. And then in three, yeah, he's mostly in the bed, but he's getting his skull sawed into, and he's meanwhile he's sitting there taunting Amanda, and and just trying to work everybody up. So like he was so integral to each of his little traps each time, at least
Yeah.
in the first three movies, that taking him out, like it definitely feels like there's a loss, because while Hoffman puts himself into the one in number four, um, after that, he keeps himself out of that.
He
And
also
yeah,
he looks so fucking smug about it too.
yeah,
It's a different energy when Hoffman's involved in a trap.
yeah,
Uh, but yeah, something was lost with John, but then you do kind of I I really appreciated just like what John had brought, and how well he had thought through stuff after that, especially knowing like especially preparing for the fact he wasn't going to be there for like these particular traps where it's like,
yeah,
this needs to continue on after me, but like he knew fully he was not going to be there, and just that like doubling down on the him being that prepared to die in at the end of
yeah.
Saw 3 was um it was special. This franchise, it's structured just in such a unique way. Like,
Yeah, I think I do think it's interesting how they've managed to keep it so tight. I mean, we already talked about it, but it's just like that is one of the biggest appeals to it, is that, each installment, you're going to get more of the story. Whatever questions you might have had, um, will probably get answered. Maybe not fully, and maybe not completely to your satisfaction, but they'll answer some of your questions. And a lot better than a lot of franchises would even attempt to. So,
yeah.
you know, like I said before, like there's so many horror franchises that are so scattered, and like every installment is just like a story in itself without any kind of narrative structure as to the whole, that it just, everything just falls apart. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sure,
No,
it's fun
it's
to watch.
fun.
Yeah, it's fun to watch movies that are, separate, and just kind of like it's more of an anthology series more than a straight through line. And that's fine. That makes it fun too. But yeah, Saw succeeds because of that as well, because because it holds it all together, especially for something that they were like literally slapping together every year,
Yeah.
quickly writing these things to make work for 7 years straight. So it's crazy how good they managed to do it. So especially in the
I
middle years.
Yeah, especially in the middle years. And I think we got it right at the right time, because I don't think we can see it a little bit. I know I keep like sounding like I'm throwing shade. I'm really excited for Saw X. I have hopes for it that I
Yes.
haven't for kind of a while, but I'm like I, I think we're at a place in narrative storytelling with franchises where we've become too reliant on like these twists and these intermediary, like, like going back and retelling parts of the story and jumbling up
Yeah.
timelines and stuff. And I don't think that we could have had Saw at like any other time. I think if we'd had it any sooner, if this had been a 90s franchise, it would have been a
It
goddamn
probably
mess.
would not have been good. Yeah.
We would have had like zombie Kramer in the fourth installation, and then like it just would
Yeah.
have gone, off we would have had
Jigsaw in
Saw in
space.
space. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's always the I think we would have had that if we'd had it sooner. And I think if these were movies that were like still being made without having had a break,
Yeah.
I think they would have gotten convoluted very quickly.
Yeah, I think they were smart by doing what they did with number seven, stopping, taking a break, and they made that conscious decision to stop, even though like at the time you're like, okay, but you left a super dangling plot thread there that really needed to be picked up right away. It'd be different if you had like, I don't know, le- like left it closed or something like that, and not had that dangling there. But boy, yeah. Well, and each
Yeah.
one has kind of been like that since then. Seven left it open. Jigsaw left it open for whatever they were going to do next. And then Spiral did the same thing. It's like, okay, but can somebody pick up a plot thread? No, we're just going to go back to between one and two. Wait, what?
That
Why?
that's my hope, is that like I hope that Saw 10 does really, really well, and then Saw 11 picks up from Saw 7. We just
Right?
don't talk about it. We just move forward from that point. And then maybe, Saw 15, when we've had our good run of those, Saw 15 can pick up from Jigsaw and you
Right.
know,
Then Saw 20 can pick up from Spiral. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh
The
man.
plot threads do drive, because it was so good about it for so long. I think it really irritates me. Like it's Saw 5 where we get the like full explanation as to why Amanda failed her test, which was like
Yeah.
2 movies ago, that this
Yeah. Yeah.
cliffhanger that we had. And like I got so used to just like being patient about them answering questions, that now that we're starting to not answer those questions, it's like, wait a minute, am I being too patient? Like, give me
Yeah.
answers though.
Do something.
Show
Make a
me every
Saw
one of the
TV show or something.
panics.
Yeah.
I w- I'd watch the hell out of a Saw TV show.
I mean,
I
I mean, obviously it's not expensive. Like the Saw movies are not expensive. So I mean, you could
no,
do a Saw TV series fairly easy. So
but I'm excited that we're getting more Saw content, and I'm excited for Saw
yeah.
10. Um, I got my Saw tattoo finally, and I did it before the movie because I was I had plans like right before. This is terrible. But I had plans to get it right before they announced Spiral, and then I was like, I'm gonna get it to celebrate Spiral. And then I saw Spiral, and I was
Yeah.
like, I don't know if I want my Saw tattoo associated with this particular Saw memory for the rest of my life. So this time I got it like well ahead. Like I made the appointment well ahead of Saw 10, so that they would be like separated in my mind, just on the off
Yeah.
chance 10 is bad. But I am excited for it. I love this franchise so much.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because, like I said, it's the same writers that wrote Jigsaw and Spiral.
Yeah.
Um, so it'll be interesting to see where they go with it. But it's also the director slash editor, Kevin Gutierrez. So he's coming back just like Darren Lynn Bousman did for Spiral. So it's like they're actually, at least, hopefully gonna make something interesting. I don't know. Um, we'll see how it works out. Um, it looks interesting, at least from the trailer. So
It does.
I'm excited to see what they do with it.
Me too. And I like I was talking about this on a different thing, because there are franchises. We talked about Halloween,
Yeah.
where they have gone back and just kind of like uh retconned the canon
Yes.
of a franchise. Someone was asking like I think that Saw 10, the premise for it, having not seen it yet, obviously, I think that going back to a time when John Kramer was alive is maybe as close as we're going to get to that in the Saw
Yeah.
franchise.
Yeah.
And that's okay with me. Like that, it's a
Yeah.
decision that I'm comfortable with, because everyone obviously, like I feel like they're looking at it and being like, this isn't working so well. We need to go back to like when it was
Yeah.
working, which was with John, and
Right.
they've chosen a point in the timeline that has John alive that they can go kind of mess with. I don't think that because this is a point, there wasn't like a 40-year break like there was
Yeah.
with Halloween, where we can be like, okay, we're going back just to the first one to start over. Like
Right.
this is still a continuing franchise that, even though there have been shorter breaks, we're still making like that first timeline. So it's a little bit too early to just start over on it. But I
Right.
do I do like that we're kind of tiptoeing to that place, where it's like this is as close as we're gonna come to that, and I'm here for it. And the thing is, I like Tobin Bell. Like I know he's
Yeah.
gonna do a great job,
Well, and Amanda's coming back too, so that's
and
that's going to be really
and
cool.
Amanda's fantastic. Amanda's my favorite. I when people ask me why I like three so much, it's like it's because it's a good Amanda story,
Yeah.
honestly.
I
Um,
just I like there's so again, it's just so much weird lost potential. Like I almost want them to remake this series. Um and I know they'd have to do different actors and everything like that. And if they could get good replacements, I'd be okay with that. Just so that maybe we could like not remake the series, but start over from one and just kind of do the things like hold to the potential. Don't kill John early. Don't kill Amanda early. You know, make Jill a much bigger, better character than she was. Um, maybe kill Hoffman earlier. Um, it's just so many potential like uh, you know, fulfill Gordon's like storyline.
yeah.
There's just so many of those things that would be actually just really fun to like look at in a new lens. And
I
just kind of see where the stories could have potentially have gone.
I do think this is one of those like there's part of my brain that always wants them to kind of start the timeline over, and then it's like that's got to
Right.
be like a be careful what you ask for thing,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
there are so
exactly.
many ways that it could go horribly wrong. But I would also like to see that, and especially if they did it as something that like was easy to differentiate from the canon, because like
Yeah.
I do now kind of have that fear where it's like if Saw 10 ends up like diverging the timelines as a fun twist and then they decide to go back to the spiral timeline, but that's Saw 11, like I would die. I my brain can't handle that. I've been defending this franchise like over half my life now. Two-thirds of my life have gone to defending Saw, and if they do something crazy, I'm gonna be mad. Um, but also like if they did something like a show, where they started just
Yeah.
at the end of one and we got to see, what we could have had. I think something like that
Yeah.
would be really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just I agree. I think that there's so many ways to mess it up. That as much as I'd like to see the good potential aspects of it, I fear that they would make the wrong choices. Um,
Yeah.
Far more because you've seen it happen time and time again when people try to redo something, um, and just they just mess it up rather than fixing it. So,
It's scary.
oh,
And I feel like the
yeah.
stakes are high for this one,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'm excited that we're still getting Saw stuff. I'm so upset that I'm not going to make it out to the unlicensed Saw musical this year. That's that's the kind of content I need in my
Oh man.
life.
I'm sure you saw it yesterday, the Saw
Oh,
AMC
the
parody.
trailer. Yeah.
The AMC made them pull it from online. So now it's
That
like
was so
like
sad.
obviously people have copied it and reposted it, but they did make them pull it. I'm like, that's great advertising,
Yeah,
So like that makes people actually appreciate the AMC the original more because of that now because
exactly.
it's a parody. It's like people need to calm down. Oh well.
Oh well.
But all right. That's about all I've had to say about these movies. I like them. I think they're good. They're kind of low on my list, but you know, again, that's not because they're bad. They're just, I like other ones more, I guess. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, but they were a lot of fun. They had a lot of interesting bits for them, and I'm glad you liked them so much. I'm glad you came on.
Yeah, I'm glad I got to come talk about Saw. I'm always happy to be on the show, but it's always exciting when I
Yeah.
feel like I have an area of expertise in something.
Yeah. No,
all the
definitely.
countless hours watching Saw has not gone to waste because I get to come on creepy and geeky and
There you go. Definitely. Well, why don't you let people know where they can find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at cat_voleur. You can find me on the other social medias at some point. Eventually, I will start using them at Cat Voleur. And you can check out my website, catvoleur.com. So, of
All right. Excellent. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on again, and thank you very much. It's always great having you on.
course, it's always great being on.
Thanks again to Kat for joining me. On Friday, Alice from the Drunken Horror Podcast joins me to talk about Spider-Man: Homecoming, and on Monday, Kat Hughes returns to the show to talk about Saw, the final chapter, and Jigsaw. Thanks for listening. Creepy and Geeky is a part of the Morbidly Beautiful Podcast Network. Please check out morbidlybeautiful.com/podcasts for more great shows. If you like what you've heard, please consider giving the show 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, please share the podcast on social media to help spread the word. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. Music for the podcast is Gratitude, composed by Jerry Smith. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and Blue Sky, and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more on TeePublic or by donating to the coffee page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.